I'd rather be a sparrow than a snail. Oh yes I would. If I could, I should. 31. When one is young, one venerates and despises without that art of nuances which constitutes the best gain of life. And it is only fair that one has to pay dearly for having assaulted men and things in this manner with yes and no. Everything is arranged so that the worst taste, the taste for the unconditional, should be cruelly fooled and abused until a man learns to put a little art into his feelings, and rather to risk trying even what is artificial, as the real artists of life do. The wrathful and reverent attitudes characteristic of youth do not seem to permit themselves any rest until they have forged men and things in such a way that these attitudes may be vented on them. After all, youth in itself has something of forgery and deception. Later, when the young soul, tortured by all kinds of disappointments, finally turns suspiciously against itself, still hot and wild, even in its suspicion and pangs of conscience, how wroth it is with itself now, how it tears itself to pieces impatiently, how it takes revenge for its long self-delusion, just as if it had been a deliberate blindness. I think that's true. That's how I experienced it. In this transition, one punishes oneself with mistrust against one's own feelings. One tortures one's own enthusiasm with doubts. Indeed, one experiences even a good conscience as a danger, as if it were a way of wrapping oneself in veils and the exhaustion of subtler honesty. And above all, one takes sides on principle against youth. 10 years later, one comprehends that all this too was still youth. Yeah, that's what happened to me. A good conscience was a danger. It was the exhaustion of a subtler honesty. Anyway, live and learn. Okay. During the longest part of human history, this is 32 now. During the longest part of human history, so-called prehistorical times, the value or disvalue of an action was derived from its consequences. This is an important aphorism, by the way. The action itself was considered as little as its origin. It was rather the way a distinction or disgrace still reaches back today from a child to its parents in China. It was the retroactive force of success or failure that led men to think well or ill of an action. Let us call this period the pre-moral period of mankind. The imperative know thyself was as yet unknown. Okay, so, all right, this aphorism goes on for a bit, but let me pause for a second. So that last aphorism on youth was strongly poetic. You could draw some stuff out of it. But this is the tempo of his work by breaking it into aphorisms. Now this one, he's going into something that is the kind of thing you could just put in a more traditionally styled philosophical paper about the pre-moral period of knowledge. He's going to go on to what state we're in then, 1866, according to him, and what he sees coming next. Right. In an era where, yeah, we're thinking of consequence, and that's how a grandfather might feel ashamed. You know, it's like retroactively reflects on him if his grandson does something wrong. And you know, I think Well, this is his take, and I think there's something to it, and I think it's an interesting thing to wonder how metaphorical versus literal it is. But anyway, we just finished the aphorism for that, sorry. But I mean, the point here is he says, the imperative know thyself was as yet unknown. So in a passage, you'll have a little phrase like that. Okay, and this is where you find the consistent part of Nietzsche. The imperative of know thyself, calling it an imperative, referring to it. It's the Socrates. It's the one dictum, right? Know thyself. For philosophers, doesn't mean it's actually ultimate. It means it's sort of ultimate for if you're into searching for truth. The truth itself still hasn't yet to be justified, but it has its appreciators. All right, so the importance of the know thyself imperative from Socrates is implicit in that sense. All right. In the last 10,000 years, however, one has reached the point step by step in a few large regions of the earth where it is no longer the consequences but the origin of an action that one allows to decide its value. On the whole, this is a great event, which involves a considerable refinement of vision and standards. It is the unconscious after effect of the rule of aristocratic values and the faith in quote-unquote dissent. The sign of a period that one may call moral in the narrow sense. It involves the first attempt at self-knowledge. Instead of the consequences, the origin. Right? Instead of just the consequences, figuring out the person, its origin. Indeed, a reversal of perspective. Surely a reversal achieved only after long struggles and vacillations. To be sure, the calamitous knew a superstition and odd narrowness of interpretation, thus became dominant. The origin of an action was interpreted in the most definite sense as origin in an intention. One came to agree that the value of an action lay in the value of the intention. And that's an interesting transition to me, right? Right? The problem, I mean, things should be judged by their consequences, but then that leads to confusion of the ends justify the means, for example. Now, I think that can be solved. By noticing there really aren't ends, there's just means after means after means. So there's no ends for the means to lead to, so the means have to justify themselves. But there's definite dangers thinking consequentially. So I agree with Nietzsche that it was good to come to intention. And yet it's silly to base everything on intention, because then we get into this other thing, like those guys intended to kill people in Boston, so that's a terrible crime we're all very curious about, follow. But if a guy in Texas, his intention is just to make money, and that leads to deaths, even more deaths, it's like, oh, but his intention was better. It's like at some point you got to come back and go, well, but it's more dangerous. Workplace safety is killing more people than terrorism. The intention is the whole origin and prehistory of an action. Almost to the present day, this prejudice dominated moral praise, blame, judgment, and philosophy on earth. But today, shouldn't we have reached the necessity of once more resolving on a reversal and fundamental shift in values owing to another self-examination of man, another growth in profundity? Don't we stand at the threshold of a period which should be designated negatively to begin with as extra-moral? After all, today, at least, we moralists have the suspicion that the decisive value of an action lies precisely in what is unintentional in it, while everything about it that is intentional, everything about it that can be seen, known, conscious, still belongs to its surface and skin, which, like every skin, betrays something but conceals even more. In short, we believe that the intention is merely a sign and symptom that still requires interpretation. Moreover, a sign that means too much and therefore taken by itself alone almost nothing. We believe that morality in the traditional sense, the morality of intentions, was a prejudice, precipitate and perhaps provisional, something on the order of astrology or alchemy, but in any case, something that must be overcome. The overcoming of morality, in a certain sense, even the self-overcoming of morality, let this be the name for that long secret work, which has been saved up for the finest and most honest, and also the most malicious consciousness of today as living touchstones of the soul. Well, that's definitely kind of passions that gets him in trouble. But see, what I take out of it is a view of history, taking time into account. It's like at one point we're animals without philosophy. We naturally evolve a way of judging actions by their consequences. And that the more sure the consequence, the more sure the judgment. Then with abstractions, we start to overcome that. We realize it matters, what you were trying to do. If you're working on a patient and you're a doctor and he dies while you're trying to save him, that's different than if he dies while you're trying to kill him. So that's an overcoming. But then that leads us in our state with certain moral problems we have, and yet another overcoming. And Nietzsche does not really have a suggestion on exactly what that would be. But he does want to free the philosophers that would undertake that from restrictive language and concepts of the past, so that we can see the whole evolution and not feel constrained within just one stage of it, so that we can develop the next stage, so that we can have a morality that somehow creates a unified theory between intention and consequence, or at least a balance of these two aspects of it. All right, cheers.